welcome to the fifth episode of Let's Talk with Aaron Johnson. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about changes to the Constitution and how it's legally done. Article 5 actually, when they wrote the Constitution, they knew that things could possibly change and they might need to add to it. So they proposed a, a way to be able to amend the Constitution so that things could be added when needed. Some things have been added and then through amendments and then had to be unadded through another amendment. Uh, Prime example would be would be the prohibition amendment, and then amendment a few years later ended prohibition. Unfortunately, it was a little bit too late at that point, but it is what they did. So Article 5 says the Congress, whenever two-thirds of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or on the application of the legislatures of two-thirds of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution, when ratified by the legislatures of three-fourths of the several states or by conventions in three-fourths thereof, as the one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by Congress. All right, so what this says is that two-thirds are needed by the several states to call a convention. Two-thirds of the 50 United States would need to get together and say, we want a convention on a proposed amendment. But then after those states all meet, all 50 states meet, then three-fourths of those, the conventions, either of those states or of the convention, three-fourths of the members of that convention of the different states um, are must then approve, must then approve it. Well, then it can become a uh, amendment to the Constitution. Interesting, isn't it? So it's two-thirds of the states can call a convention, but then three-fourths of that state, of those of the members of that convention, of three-fourths of the states, have to approve of the proposed amendment before it can become an amendment. And that's where we'll end reading Article 5. And basically, the rest of it says that before 1808, no amendments could be proposed. Um, besides the first 10 were already being proposed and added. And that's really an interesting study. And maybe sometime I'll do that about why the first 10 amendments, because they discussed them when they wrote the Constitution, but they chose to add those as amendments and not as the founding part of the documents. Really, really interesting story. And maybe at some point I'll go over that because that's really kind of fun to discuss that. But let's go over. I want to go over a few things here because this is really fun. From This is the all of the links of things that I talk about will be in the comments of this video, um, and the description of this video. So you're more than welcome to follow those links and join the discussion. Look at those things. Comment, please. Share these videos. Share this podcast, and let's have a little fun with it. Okay, let's talk. That's the whole point of this. Let's talk. Um, so the number of proposed amendments to the Constitution. And this is from the first Congress to the 101st Congress. So that would be 1789 to 1990. You ready for this? There was a proposed 10,431 amendments to the Constitution. Whoa. 1991 to 1992, there was 153. The 103rd Congress, 93 to 94, was 155. 104th was 152. And all the way down to, let's see, I think it goes to last year. Let's see. Yeah, 118th, which is 23 to 24, was 69. So they slowly decrease each year. It's really kind of cool because it's just it's kind of fun to hear about this stuff. Um, and of course, we know that there's hasn't really been a whole lot of amendments since the 70s, the 60s, 70s. When was that last one? I don't have it right in front of me. Um, but it was that's the last amendment. So then, so here are some of the proposed amendments to the Constitution. Um, these are ones that have not been passed, which is really kind of cool. In the 19th century, um, this was 1838, so 37 years after the Constitution was written, um, was called the Dueling Ban Amendment. And that was that was because two congressmen, two representatives, fought in a duel, and one of them got killed. And John C. Calhoun in 1850 um, proposed constitutional amendments requiring an equal number of slave states and free states, and as part of that, creating co-presidents, one from the North and one from the South. Um, and then a similar amendment to eliminate the presidency so as to have just two elected officials in its place was proposed by Representative Albert Jenkins in 1860, shortly before the American Civil War. Um, so that's two of them or three of them. So let's see, we had the dueling ban, and co-presidents, and then do away with the presidency completely and just have two co-leaders. You know how bad that would be? I mean, seriously? Wow. And then in February of 1863, they had what was called the Christian Amendment, which would have added acknowledgement of the Christian God in the preamble to the Constitution. So they were trying to change the preamble. And that was also proposed in 1874, 1896, 1910, and then the last attempt was in 1954. And that last attempt didn't even garner enough to even bring it to a vote. So there you go. We also had the Blaine Amendment. It was proposed in 1875. This would have banned public funds from going to religious purposes. Um, and its entire purpose, when they proposed it, its entire purpose was to prevent the Catholics from taking advantage of federal funds. That was when the Catholics were feared that they were going to take over the world. Um, so, yeah. But hold on now. We still got more. And this is just in the 19th century, so the 1800s, okay? So then there was also an amendment proposed allowing property owning unmarried women to vote. Fortunately, we all men got smart and decided that, women being some of the smarter people in the world probably ought to have a say in the vote. Um, and that was actually the 19th Amendment was actually um, added to the Constitution in 1920. That's exciting. And it was irrespective of marital status or property. And at one point, they even tried to say during this amendment, property owning unmarried women to vote. Um, and then was just like, let's just have only married women. And you basically know what that was because at this time, um, women were not allowed, to disagree with their husbands. So they were told basically that they had to, if they allowed that, then it was basically men were going to get two votes. It's ignorant. Um, and then it doesn't even give a date for this one, but it was in the 1800s. Um, Representative Lucas M. Miller proposed a constitutional amendment to change the country's name, the United States of America, to the United States of the Earth. I'm going to have to look that one up because it doesn't give a whole lot of information on that one. I'm a little interested in that one. That seems a little weird, doesn't it? And then we have the 20th century. So now we're into the 1900s. Um, there was an amendment by Representative Victor Berger in 1911 to do away with the Senate. Um, and also, in this amendment, it would have also shielded the House of Representatives to where it had a unicameral representation, one house, Congress, just the Congress, the House of Representatives, would have uh, shielded the House of Representatives legislation from presidential veto and judicial review. How dangerous that would have been! Oh Lord! Um, because at the time, senators were appointed by the governors of the states. So that was in 1911, and in 1912, um, then it became where senators were voted on by the people. So up until that time, all the senators were appointed by the governors of each state, and I can understand their reasoning for it. But a unicameral legislature is dangerous, very dangerous. And then they wanted to take away the whole point of the veto power and judicial review of the laws. We would have set ourselves up for a monarchy coming out of the House of Representatives. So there was also in 1912 a an amendment to the Constitution to forbid interracial marriage. And unfortunately, this was Representative Seaborn Roddenberry, and he was a Southern Democrat from Georgia. I'm just going to leave that alone. Um, we, I'm just going to leave that one alone. And several states, there were also, beyond that, there was also similar amendments proposed by Andrew King, a Missourian Democrat, in 1871, and by Senator Coleman Blease, a South Carolinian Democrat, in 1928. None were passed by Congress, although numerous state legislatures did pass laws prohibiting interracial marriage within their state. But those were actually ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court's 1967 Loving v. Virginia decision, as it should be. As it should be. I mean, we had a constitutional amendment giving former slaves citizenship and the right to vote. So at no point should that be hindered Anyway, and then in 1914, an anti-polygamy amendment was proposed by Representative Frederick Gillette, a Massachusetts Republican, but he was supported by a U.S. Senator from Utah, Frank J. Cannon, and by the National Reform Association. And mainly because Utah was dominated by the LDS Church, which permitted multiple marriages until 1890. And so they wanted to do away with polygamy. Great idea. Um, yeah. And then we had the Ludlow Amendment, um, proposed by Representative Lewis Ludlow in 1937. This amendment would have heavily reduced America's ability to be involved in war, requiring a national referendum to confirm any declaration of war. And public support was very robust for this in the 1930s because America was going through a period of isolationism, which means that we're taking care of ourselves and only ourselves. Which, if you look back on history, is one of the leading causes of why World War One and World War Two were so dangerous, because neither one possibly could have taken nearly as many lives had we been involved in the politics of the world. Not saying that we needed to go out and be the world's policeman, not that. No, not at all. We don't need to get involved in every war, but we weren't even helping try to keep countries from fighting. We weren't trying to be a peacemaker. We were just like, yeah, y'all go do what you want to do. And then they had a maximum wage amendment in 1933 proposing, saying that you could make no more than $1 million in your lifetime, period. And the reason being is because we were in the Great Depression at this time, and they thought that it was the wealthy's fault. That had they not amassed over $1 million, the wealthy, then we wouldn't have gotten into a depression. Totally missed the point of what happened and why we got into a depression, and it really had nothing to do with millionaires and people making money. It really didn't. It had to do with a whole lot of really bad politics and really bad thoughts, and this is kind of why. So, when you look at today's society, people all ganging up against the rich, apparently they didn't learn, right? Okay. And then in 1933 as well, then they also wanted an amendment to limit investment income, also because of the current climate at that time. Um, and multiple attempts to repeal the 21st Amendment ending prohibition were proposed, um, by Representative Morris Shepherd, who actually was the introducer of the 18th Amendment, which actually made prohibition legal. Um, and then the 21st Amendment ended prohibition, and he's still trying to repeal that, saying that alcohol is. Um, and then he followed by an attempt to outlaw drunkenness after his first proposals failed. So then, after he couldn't get the 21st Amendment repealed by another amendment. So then he just tried to get an amendment banning drunkenness. I mean, that seems a little dangerous because one person can get drunk with one drink, with one bottle of beer, and somebody else can drink 35 and not feel it. Might need to check their liver at that point. But anyway, then we had the Bricker Amendment, in 1951 by Ohio Senator John W. Bricker, would have limited the federal government's treaty making power by prohibiting treaties from violating the U.S. Constitution and limiting executive agreements. It was opposed by Dwight Eisenhower, the president, and it failed twice to reach the threshold of 2/3 of voting members necessary for its passage. The first time by 8 votes, and the second time by 1. Now, This would be dangerous because by limiting the federal government's ability to make treaties, you would have anybody and everybody making treaties. And we need to have one solid voice making treaties. Um, and that's why it's very, very important that we look at these amendments and we try to learn from them, especially the ones that have failed, and rethink our thoughts on those. We're working on it. We're getting there. But that's and then they had a repeal of the 22nd Amendment would eliminate term limits for presidents. So the 22nd Amendment limited presidents to 2 terms, and that came about because of FDR's 4 terms as president. And up until the 22nd Amendment, every president had either only served 1 term or 2. And that started with George Washington, who served 2 terms and then stepped down. And they continued that. If they won, they only ran twice until FDR, and then he actually had 4 terms. Did not live to see the end of his 4th term, but he actually was elected 4 separate times, and so that's when that amendment was proposed. A great amendment. Think we should probably propose an amendment to put terms on congressmen and senators as well. That's if you're a senator or a congressman, the people would like that. Thank you. And this was also, of course, um, Harry Truman, Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, and Donald Trump have all expressed support for some sort of repeal. First time it was attempted in 1956, after only 5 years after its ratification. They were rethinking that one pretty quick, weren't they? um, all the way through. They have actually, in 2025, Andy Ogles, a representative from Tennessee, um, has proposed that we permit presidents to run for 3 terms so long as the 2 previous terms were not consecutive. So, in other words, they couldn't be president for 12 years straight, but they could. Um, give an example of, say, Donald Trump, where he was president for 4 years, got defeated, and then got reelected recently. So, according to this proposed amendment, then he would be able to run 2 terms this time, and would be his 3rd term. I don't know how I think about that. No matter what your thoughts on whichever president, I really think 2 terms is great. 2 terms, period. Let's just be done with it. Okay, let's move on and get some fresh blood in there, or at least a different voice. And let's see what we can do with that. That's where we get our voting rights, right? Exactly. And then there was a school prayer amendment to establish that the people retain the right to pray and to recognize their religious beliefs, heritage, and traditions on public property, including schools. Was proposed by Robert Byrd of West Virginia in he did this a lot, okay? 1962, 1973, 1979, 1982, 1993, 1995, 1997, and 2006. And Ernest Istook, from a representative from Oklahoma, proposed the amendment in the House on May 8th of 1997. In 1998, the House Judiciary Committee passed the bill by a 16-11 vote, and the full House voted on the amendment 224 to 203 in favor. The vote was 61 short of the required 2/3 majority. So I almost got it. As much as I agree that school prayer should be allowed in schools, I'm not 100% sure that it should become part of the Constitution, in the simple fact that we have many, many religions in this country. And that is part of what makes our country so great. If it should not be banned, it should not be, if children, if school kids all the way up through high school want to get together to pray, then that should not be banned by the school boards, state government, or any form of government. That should be left to them. Government needs to stay out of the religion. There was a reason that this says that Congress shall make no law hindering of religion. I think that's an amendment in the first 10. Hmm. They also had, in 1995, there was a flag desecration amendment proposed to give Congress the power to make acts such as flag burning illegal. But in the 1990 Supreme Court case, Texas v. Johnson, Supreme Court ruled that such laws were unconstitutional. In 1995 to 2005, the proposed amendment was passed by the House of Representatives, but never by the Senate. Then you have the Bay-Seller Amendment, which this is the closest that the United States has come to pass an electoral college abolition amendment, and it would have replaced it with a two-round system. Basically, you propose, these people win the election, and then they got to do it again. The electoral college is very, very important, and at some point, I will take time to go over that, um, because what would it basically be replacing with the electoral college going away and needing a certain amount is that it would be popular vote only. And we've seen over the last few elections that the popular vote can be manipulated by places and countries and locations allowing illegal immigrants, criminals to vote. You sway the public opinion to sway the um, elections. We see how dangerous that is. Yes. And certain places like, we'll say, Los Angeles, New York City, um, those two cities alone have, if you went with popular vote, would outvote states like West Virginia, Kansas, Nebraska, because they have more populace in just those two cities. So, I mean, could you imagine what that would be? What kind of chaos that would bring? So, yes, the Electoral College needs to stay, and we will try to. I'll make a note to discuss this at some point, um, because this is really, really interesting. And then we have the human. So we've had the Human Rights Amendment was first proposed in 1973, which would overturn the Roe v. Wade court ruling and prohibit abortion. A total of 330 proposals using varying text have been proposed. None of them have ever gotten out of committee. Um, that was in 1973. We've also had a balanced budget amendment in which Congress and the president are forced to balance the budget every year. This has been introduced many times, dating back to the 1930s, but no measure has passed either body of Congress until 1982, when the Senate took 11 days to consider it and gained the necessary two-thirds majority. Um, and it has never passed to be done. There have been various proposed amendments for congressional term limits. Um, although the Supreme Court has ruled that state term limits on federal employees to be unconstitutional in the U.S. Term Limits Inc. v. Thornton decision in 1995. The Single Subject Amendment, an amendment first proposed in 1996, would introduce a single subject rule blocking members of Congress from adding riders to bills. Not a bad idea. Not a bad idea at all. So that's all in the 1900 or the 20th century. We've had the Equal Opportunity to Govern Amendment proposed in July of 2003 by Senator Orrin Hatch. This would repeal the Constitution's natural born citizens clause, thus allowing naturalized citizens who have been U.S. citizens for at least 20 years to become president of the United States or vice president. Um, that has never passed. That's actually kind of a good thing, in my opinion. Just my opinion. We had the Federal Marriage Amendment that was introduced four times in 2003, 2004, 2005, and 2008. by multiple members of Congress. It would define marriage and prohibit same sex marriage, even at the state level. Again, I worry about government being involved in too many decisions, too many things. Um, whether or not my personal opinion on same sex marriage is my personal opinion. Um, now, there are certain things that I believe, but that's not to be defined by the Constitution, in my opinion. So that's just my opinion. They've had also had some campaign finance reform amendments. None of them have passed, unfortunately. Um, Marco Rubio, Senator Marco Rubio, and Representative Stephen Palazzo proposed constitutional amendments barring the government from imposing taxes on refusal to purchase goods and services. It would have uh, ended the penalties that people have when they didn't want to take Obamacare. Um, and Representative Randy Nogemeyer, I guess that's his name. Sorry about that, sir. Introduced an amendment requiring a two-thirds majority for Congress to raise the debt ceiling. Not a bad idea. Actually, that's probably a pretty good idea. Um, and then there have been various proposals been made for a constitutional amendment abolishing birthright citizenship for children of foreign nationals as a deterrent against illegal immigration. Um, that's something I would have to think about, and I would have to look at the wording of the amendment before I could give a yay or nay on it. How that would, what my thoughts would be on that. Representative Steve King, sorry, introduced an amendment repealing the 16th Amendment and abolishing the federal income tax. Let's go with that. How about that? Yeah. Um, Representative John Culberson introduced an amendment altering Article 5 to limit any national convention convoked by the states to amend the Constitution to a single amendment and requiring Congress to authorize such a convention. Um, I, that gives too much power to the federal government and can limit what the states can do, which totally defeats the whole point of the Constitution. The Constitution is to limit the federal government to only the rules written in it and only those rules. And then, if laws are passed to enhance that Constitution, then there you go. But to say that the states can't propose an amendment that's taken away the rights of the people to govern themselves. There have been various proposals made by Republican members of Congress to base congressional appointments on the number of citizens in a state rather than residents. I, I would have to look at that one, to be honest with you. Um, Representative Al Green in 2017 introduced an amendment prohibiting the President of the United States from issuing a pardon for themselves. All right. Well, I mean, we have um, proposed an amendment to prohibiting barriers of voting for adult Americans, including undue burden of proof of identity or citizenship. You can't vote if you're not a United States citizen, and everybody has an ID, state ID. You can get one if you don't have one. The costs for such things are minimal, um, but a driver's license, such thing, that ignorance. All you're trying to do at that point, I don't care what you say, when you try to say you don't have to give an ID to vote, is basically you are attempting to allow foreign countries, foreign nationals to interfere with our elections and sell out our elections to foreign countries so that they can get the people that they think will help them out. That's illegal and no. And then we've also, of course, had Representatives try to change the 2-year term to a 4-year term for the House of Representatives. They've also tried to increase the members of the Supreme Court from 9 members um, to actually doesn't even say um, doesn't say how many members, which is because actually the Constitution does not specify how many justices should sit on the court. It just happens to be 9, and it should be 9 because you need a tiebreaker in there. You don't need an even number, um, and too many people. It's too many proposals, too many ideas, too many thoughts for what they do. If that makes any sense. We had a parental rights amendment would allow parents' rights to direct the upbringing of their children, protected from federal interference in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. That was proposed in July of 2008. That's it's a shame that our country has come to such a point, even in 2008, where we feel like we have to write into our Constitution that the government can't tell us, or a non-government entity such as the UN can tell us how to raise our children. That's a problem we have that's not government problem. That's a home problem. That's and then of course Joe Biden proposed an amendment known as the "No One Is Above the Law" amendment um, to supersede the 2024 Supreme Court decision Trump v. United States, which granted presidents immunity for official acts. Um, and they tried it twice and it failed both times. So this it just goes over some of the proposed amendments. It's quite interesting, actually. But you can look at the um, all the sources that I have. They'll be in the comments here for you to look at. Look at them, read them, comment, and let's talk. And again, thank you for tuning in to the episode 5 of Let's Talk with Aaron Johnson. We'll talk to you later. Bye.